Hello and welcome to Thinkpodpowered by the FII Institute. For more than 30 years, I led Sky News' coverage of global events, holding to account the politicians and change makers shaping the world of today. In this series, filmed at the 6th Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, I've got the opportunity to question those shaping the future. At this inflection point in our history, how can we ensure that the future is one of prosperity and opportunity for all? This episode, I'm joined by Noor Sweid, one of the most prominent venture capitalists in the Middle East and North African region. She works to support the founders who are utilizing technology to transform their societies.
I'm going to do what I think is best to enable other people.
As the world is de-globalizing, we learn why the Middle East could act as a crossroads of collaboration between North, East, South and West. Well, welcome to ThinkPod. Could I ask you to start by introducing yourself?
Well, thank you for having me, Adam. I'm Noor Sweid. I am the founding partner, managing partner of a venture capital firm in Dubai called Global Ventures. We invest across the Middle East and Africa in Series A tech companies.
You've done a lot more before that, of course. You're one of the world's top 50 women in tech, Arabian Business 100 most powerful Arab women, and also an Arab Woman Award for Finance. So how did it all start with you?
Well, it all started a very long time ago. It started about 27 years ago. We moved to Dubai as a family. So I was in high school, didn't have many options in the
Where from? Where did you come from?
So I grew up in London, moved to Saudi, moved to Dubai, so really all over the place. And I left Dubai in the late 90s to go to university. I went to Boston. And then I worked for a few years in Boston in consulting for biotech and pharma. I did my MBA, and I was recruited out of business school by Booz Allen to come back to Dubai. So that brought me back to the region in 2005. And very quickly then ended up in family business, which is something else that I had never thought as a child.
Which was what?
Which was interior contracting. So the first day, I'm sitting with my father and he says, we do interior contracting. And I say, ooh, design. And he says, far from. First lesson is we take the design, which is on a piece of paper, and we actually do the contracting work to make it happen. So it's sometimes on an A4 piece of paper, A3 piece of paper, all these scans and beautiful sketches. And the question is, what's this made from? How does it fit together? How do you manufacture it? So we take a building that's just concrete and steel, and we work the way through to giving a front door key. And he had focused the business on high-end hospitality and on infrastructure. So things like airports, Dubai Airport, things like Four Seasons hotels, and so on. I joined in 2005 to help out for a few weeks. That turned to many years. And really had the privilege of working with my father and learning so much from him.
And you built that up into an IPO eventually?
We built that up. So when I joined in 2005, it was 60 million revenue in about 6 countries, about 1,000 people. By 2008, it was 600 million revenues, the biggest in the world in over 20 countries. Singapore had become our biggest market. We had 9,500 people. We IPO'd in April 2008, so 2 months before that crisis. Very fortunate to list in London, one of the first companies out of the region. Well, it was great because it meant we had $400 million in cash, just over $420 million in cash. And the world was suddenly in a place where a lot of people were cash strapped, particularly in our industry. So you had 3rd and 4th generation companies all over the world, including, for example, a 120-year-old company, 4th generation in Germany that did yacht fit out, that we were able to come in and provide, the family business mindset, a lot of capital, and enable them to keep growing. And really that blend of family values and family business alongside access to capital markets really enabled us to consolidate the world.
And that's what really got you into capital investment.
And that's what got me into capital investment. So 5 years after IPO, my father had retired, I had moved on, and I took some time to kind of reflect on what were some of my key learnings. And some of them were from DEPA and working with my father, which was, growth matters, but jobs matter more. And really job creation, going from 1,000 to 9,000 people in 3 years was instrumental to him personally and as such to me. And another learning was a side business that I had. I had on the weekends decided to start a little yoga studio because when I moved back to Dubai, I was a big yogi and I couldn't find a studio. And my answer to most things in life is if you can't find it, build it. And so really started a little yoga studio, had 2 teachers, and 4 years later we had 72 teachers, 6,000 students a month in 5 locations, and sold that to a private equity firm for the only reason that every time I walked in, I'd have to solve business problems. I couldn't practice yoga. So that defeated the purpose. My learning there was very much, it's so hard to be an entrepreneur. Actually, in my humble opinion, it was much harder to do that than to run a $1 billion public company. And so in that journey, I started to think, wow, if it's that hard, and I'm very fortunate and privileged in having a job to put food on the table and really having an education and working globally before, how is it for founders in emerging markets that haven't had those experiences?
Now, global ventures, you're not just investing your own money, are you?
No.
How much are you, how much are you investing?
So we have a few $100 million under management. So we're just over $200 million AUM. We've invested in 56 companies across 2 funds. Funduan is a 2018 vintage and was $50 million. Has performed as a top decile fund globally by PitchBook's rankings. So we've been able to establish that in this part of the world, you can generate those returns. We have what we call a 0.7 DPI, which means that we've returned 70% of the capital to investors, while still having the winners in our portfolio. So doing that really takes that question of, well, you can invest in the region, but are there any exits? Yes, we've had 4 exits. So again, part of my personality on, let's prove that this can be done. It can be done. We've raised, half our capital comes from outside the region, right? So it's not just regional capital. It's believing in the region. We're investing in the region. We're working with these founders to create global companies. And we're exiting and generating returns.
And what is the philosophy? What are you investing in? Indeed, what are you not investing in?
Absolutely. So we're not investing in crypto. We never have. Why? So why? Because it's early. I would love to invest in crypto several years from now.
It's not that good for the environment, is it?
No, I don't think it's good for the environment. We do invest in Web3-based protocols. And the reason is that those projects are solving real problems. The region doesn't have Web 2 infrastructure. We think of the region as all of the Middle East and Africa.
So what do you mean when you say Web 2, Web 3?
So Web 2 is the internet as you and I know it. So a lot of that infrastructure has not been built in many parts of Africa, north, south, in many parts of the region, Pakistan included, Turkey. So when we take a look, we say if the technology and the solutions have not yet been built, let's take education, for example. So what we think of as online education might not exist in other parts of the world. If it hasn't been built yet, and you're about to go build it, would you not build it on a better protocol like a Web3 blockchain? So for example, a company we invested in Pakistan called Metaschool enables anybody to become an engineer for blockchain. So it teaches coding using emerging market languages and then has a marketplace for jobs. So once you've graduated her course, she can place you in a job to start generating income. So think about income distribution and job growth. And she takes a percentage of your future earnings for the 1 year based on these protocols. So those are the smart contracts that are only available using blockchain. And you can now do that. You couldn't have done that in Web 2. So you're creating jobs, you're creating education without charging people in emerging market languages, and it's a viable business model. We invested about a year ago. Sequoia's just led her next round. So we come in earlier to find these incredible local or regional best-in-class founders.
So that involves both creating the network and the content. Yeah.
All of it, the network, the content, and the platform, the marketplace. And you can do this because you have the demand.
Again, going back to the philosophy of global ventures, so education is the first one, is it?
It's one of. So we're agnostic. We do align with 5 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, education being one of them. Through the platform, 600,000 people have had access to education. 4.2 million now have access to healthcare. Our fund 2 was 40% digital health, really solving the problem of access. We have in sub-Saharan Africa 0.2 doctors per 1,000. In MENA, 1 doctor per 1,000. In Europe, you have 4. Right? So it's not that we'll ever have enough doctors. It's about how do you create a platform for doctors to treat people when people can't have enough doctors, let alone get to them. Sometimes it's a several-hour drive. So health tech is very important. And then financial inclusion. So the portfolio has included 43 million people that have previously not had access to any of financial services. So when we think about funding these companies, these things matter. The portfolio has created 8,500 jobs in the last 3.5 years. That's a lot of high quality jobs for any part of the world, and especially here where we have such high youth unemployment, 40% or so. And then we take a look at gender. So whether it's founders or C-suites, it's about 30%. That's how we like to see it. It's not just a founder, it's also you need females on these leadership teams. Those are the areas that we focus. Overall, when we think about climate, which is a super hot topic and trending right now, and you're about to go there, so I beat you to it. We think that all of our businesses are sustainable by design. And I'll take a minute and explain what we mean there. I'll give 2 examples. It's very much that you cannot afford petrol, gas. You cannot wait in line if you're living in this part of the world in general. We can exclude 1 or 2 smaller economies here, but if you think about Nigeria, if you think about Egypt. So when you go out to build a financial inclusion platform for mobility, a company called Max in Nigeria, and you say, I'll give you $10 in the morning per se, you give me back $11 in the evening. In the meantime, you go out and rent this 3-wheeler or this moped and Uber around. And then these guys borrowing actually spend half their time in queues at the gas stations because they fill up incrementally because they can't afford to fill up the whole tank, and what if they don't use it? And it's so expensive. So these founders then go away, they're both MIT alums, and they design a solar-powered 3-wheeler EV that I will charge you less if you borrow for that. Yeah. And they've manufactured now over 1,000 of them that are on the roads, and these are preferred. So it's not that they're trying to solve the climate problem. They're trying to solve mobility and financial inclusion and allowing people to borrow these microloans. But the problem, the crux of the problem is we have to solve for these things without petrol.
I mean,
so there's sustainability by business model design. They are not scalable if they depend on petrol and energy.
Well, this is your view, really, that
yes.
if you invest, it's got to be sustainable.
It's got to be sustainable first, because
not ideologically, but practically.
Practically. It's not a good business model if it's not sustainable. If it relies on power or energy, it cannot scale in a part of the world where people cannot afford power and energy. So another very small example, we have a company that has built an EMR for medical records, so an electronic medical record system, solving the problem of less than 30% of hospital visits across Africa are documented. So God forbid someone's sick, goes in for a surgery, and comes back the next day, there is a 70% likelihood they have no records. And this is an undereducated population largely. When we took a look at this company, we said, well, what's the main pain point in keeping these records? What is the pain point you're solving for? And they said, these records rely on the internet to work, which means that power has to always be on.
Yeah.
And so if we can build something that's offline first, you can actually start solving this problem. This company has now gone from 1 country into 6 countries across the region, into over 2,000.
When you say offline, how do you mean it?
So you can use it and you can insert the records and everything, and
you store it and then...
You store it, and then every so often it tags up, right? And so you're literally in a position where you're saying, we want to solve the pain of the problem. The pain of the problem is power. Yeah. It's not the medical records. And so again, it has to be sustainability first. You cannot be depending on power all the time. You cannot be depending on energy all the time. Those are not sustainable or scalable business models.
Agri-tech as well, you're investing in.
Agri-tech.
Give us some examples of that.
So again, back to sustainability. So agri-tech is really food security. Can we create enough food? What does that look like? Obviously, it's important that it's not all processed and manufactured food. So we're taking a look at how do you solve for this in a part of the world where, again, one of the biggest problems with vertical farming is power and water. And so one of the companies we've invested in, which is based in Saudi Arabia and now expanded globally, even into the US, has a technology and all the patents behind desalinating salt water using 95% less energy than traditional methods. So it's called Red Sea, the company. So we've gone in and said, can we retrofit farms? Can we provide the software globally? This shouldn't be just about our part of the world. If you can reduce the amount of power required by 95% to desalinate water for the purpose of vertical farming, that's a huge thing. And again, it's back to how can we do this sustainably from a business model perspective. So that company has grown. It's amazing.
But that only applies obviously to coastal.
Well, that applies to coastal. Let's start there.
Yeah.
Right. So that's still a lot of the world. And again, we're not going to solve all the problems of the world, but this is one of the key ones. So this is being rolled out now in Africa and in the US and so on, because it's simply a better technology, a better software, and a better, more sustainable way to do food security.
So everything you do is based around tech. I mean, it's a bit like sustainability. You can't avoid it.
We can't avoid tech. So everything we do really brings together this concept of we live in a part of the world where there's 1.5 billion people. Half of us are under 30. And so when you just think about that, it means we are not just growing consumers, we are growing creators. And we are able to identify on-the-ground problems that affect hundreds of millions of people. And at the same time, able to identify cutting-edge technology to solve those problems. So how do we leapfrog? We leapfrogged in fintech. We never built banks. We went straight to digital banks and financial inclusion as such. We are leapfrogging in health tech. We will never build enough hospitals. It's about digital remote diagnostics, digital health, and really enabling the healthcare system to access more people rather than building more hospitals. And now we're taking a look at manufacturing. So we still import most things, but as you go to a deglobalizing world where supply chain disruption is something we believe is relatively permanent, or supply chain change is permanent, if we're going to be manufacturing for these 1.5 billion consumers and creators, are we going to manufacture the traditional way, or are we going to 3D print and use additive manufacturing and use just-in-time manufacturing, not just-in-time inventory management, and really take cutting-edge technologies and marry them with what is needed regionally and locally, and solve those problems the best way possible for this large population?
I mean, that does, I mean, we've talked about education already, but that requires extremely well-trained population, doesn't it, to operate all these systems?
So the region's 85% digital. So you're talking, again, because half of us are under 30, we're mainly digital natives. And so as you take a look at that, it's not retraining. Again, it's first-time skilling, first-time training. Education is important. We have 150 million out-of-school children in this part of the world. That is half the world's out of school. So as you think about those numbers, this is the most important area in the world for EdTech. It's the biggest market. It's also the most important rising population that doesn't have access to even basic education.
You've been here raising funds. I mean, we've had an investment downturn. Isn't so much money. I mean, how confident are you in the coming decades, say it's going to be there, we're going to have the money to fund the sort of things you want to fund?
You know, I have a certain level of confidence that there's interest in investing at all times. The question is, where does that interest go? What's a fad? What's permanent? Where can you create returns? I am hopeful that the world is turning into a, where can we create returns and do good? We are a proper VC, we are a true VC, and people are still very excited about venture capital. But I think that what's interesting about this part of the world, where there is movement in the conversation globally, is this is a part of the world where you can actually create those returns, generate venture capital returns, really have exits, and at the same time, change lives. So we're still seeing a lot of engagement from around the world through the region. I think the region has become a hub, very much so, for East and West to meet. And I think that that's something that's good. And there's opportunity there for people to really come up in terms of from poverty into middle class as the economies start to grow.
That's the future for this region, you think, as a bridge, if you like?
Between East meets West?
Yeah.
Perhaps. I think it would be very interesting to witness that.
And South meets North, perhaps.
Why not? So I think that the region is definitely providing a place that's very cosmopolitan for everybody to come together, for like-minded people to meet and people that are not so like-minded to meet, and really explore ideas. It's always been a hub in that sense. And it's just leaning into that. It's always been a main part of a trade route. It's always been the East goes to West through here. Why not continue that? It's always been that way in history.
And finally, your ambition for the next 10 years?
I would love to see more interest globally in the region on the venture capital front. I think that investing in technology in this part of the world has the potential to not just create returns, but really uplift society, change lives, and have the technology that's being invented globally be used in a very meaningful way.
No, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me, Ed.
In these turbulent times, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to ThinkPod for more insight and analysis.